Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, you inky savages. Thanks once again for joining us for another episode of the PenBoyRoy Pentertainment Podcast. We are at episode number 166. How do you like our matching glasses? Me and the Odd Oink, we got matching glasses for everybody watching and who can see. If you're not watching and you're listening, well, we have matching glasses. I've been meaning to send these back to him because he left them in my car last year, but I'm just so terrible at mailing stuff. So
obviously I've replaced them.
He's just replaced them. Sorry, Tom. But anyway, I'm kind of wearing this as a nod and ode to my good friend.
I think you like it. It looks good on you. I would say, I think it might be your style. I think you could go for it.
Well, so the thing is, I'm probably not going to wear them outside because my head is more melon-like than yours. So I always felt like my head is disproportionately too large relative to my body. So it just wouldn't look good. It looked good on you. They don't look good on me. But please check out the Gold Spot affiliate link in the description below to buy your inks, pads, and pens. And make sure to use coupon code. Is it the same coupon code?
Yes.
Okay, coupon code Garfield for the remainder of this month. Is that correct?
Garfield.
Yeah,
yes.
Garfield, for an additional savings on all products on the Gold Spot website with some exclusions applying. So again, the affiliate link is in the description below. So this week, we're going to talk a little bit about what's coming out new, what's new and exciting with Luxury Brands of America, specifically Platinum Brands. So go for it, Tom. Do you want to bring up some images so that people can see?
Sure. So I'm just checking here. All right, let me put that up on the camera.
So Tom's going to talk about the new Platinum Curados. But they're not just your regular Curadoses. They are matte finished Curadoses.
This is like
Check those out.
Curados 2.0. It's a new edition of Curados pens that... The Curados, if you remember, is a retractable fountain pen that is kind of set lower at a price point than a Vanishing Point, so more approachable, kind of, and I wouldn't say entry-level retractable nib fountain pen, but one of significant quality that's not going to be as expensive as a Vanishing Point with a gold nib, but still a Japanese, kind of a Japanese heritage sort of minimalist, retractable pen design that it technically it works really well, and I think they really got the kinks ironed out, because this is not very easy to do, a retractable fountain pen, because the fountain pen needs to stay very, I don't want to use the M word for it. It has to stay wet. So it has to stay wet in order to be able to write with it on demand instantly with just retracting the nib in and out. So, if you're going to make a pen like that, you got to make it so that it's going to write on demand and then also not dry out on you. And that's what the Curados does, is that they've engineered it. They've made it very, I'd say, like almost overcomplicated to fill the pen, but just a little bit tricky, but it's very satisfying though. There's a lot of like notches and stuff like that to go. And the Curados though is in this 2.0 version is a matte finish that looks really modern, and I think very sleek looking, and also tactile wise feels a lot better than just the regular plastic that they were using in the first edition of it. So it's available in 3 colors, of which is all black. Then there's the blue and the red. And as you can see with the diagrams I'm putting on the screen, if you can, I'll describe it for you, is that they prevent ink evaporation using this kind of the similar sort of design ethics as they did with the slip and seal cap mechanism. So they want to make sure that every time that you pick up a Curados, it's going to write when it has ink, either the cartridge or the converter filled with it. So this particular set also includes a bottle of ink as well. So it's a limited edition set. These are now available at Gold Spot or any other platinum retailer, and available in either fine or medium point. Like I said, it's a steel nib, and it's a really nice pickup. We'll talk a little bit more outside of the sponsorship read, but there's an interesting experiment that we performed with the Curados with Adam from An Ink Guy on YouTube.
Yes.
That we just got the results back on, which happened to happen at the same time as these pens coming into stock. So
That's awesome. So it's almost as if you guys planned it out this way, even though
it was
didn't.
very fortuitous. We did not plan it. So
Yeah. So I've been in communication with Adam from an ink guy, and he's actually using segments of my video in that. But we'll talk more about that later. So again, use the affiliate link in the description below to make your purchases, especially for this Platinum Curados 2.0 with the rubber grip. I actually really liked it when I went to Gold Spot and Bryce was showing us the
matte
samples, the matte ones. I just loved the feel in the hand. I also love the look. Because it's a matte finish and it has a rubberized feel to it, it doesn't feel as or look as chintzy. It has more of a high-end feel to it, and it doesn't feel as box office store-ish. It doesn't look like something or feel like something that you can purchase at a TJ Maxx or Staples or something like that. So I really appreciate the modifications they made and how they changed it up. So congratulations. I think that's like the first sponsorship read in a while that we did that's under like 80 minutes. But anyway, I want to get on with the episode. Thank you again for joining us for episode number 166 of the Pentertainment Podcast. But before we get started, I want to give you guys a quick disclaimer. This podcast is not scripted and therefore will contain potty mouth words, both from Tom and I. So be forewarned. You have been warned. Now, on to the podcast.
The PenBoyRoy Entertainment Podcast. Stay savage.
Right, so this week was a little nuts. It looked like we lived on Mars in the Northeast.
It did.
And
it was like Total Recall,
East Coast,
where Arnold was gasping for air and his eyes were bugging out at the very end.
Yeah.
Recall that part?
It was really weird because I wasn't paying attention to the news because I've been in a brain fog since I got back from Paris. And I'm driving into work and it's just a little foggy. I'm like, all right, it is what it is. I get to work and then me and some coworkers, we decide that we want to put some new fish in the newly established 13-gallon Fluval Flex 13-gallon tank we have set up. So we went and we bought some fish, and on the way back, everything just started turning orange. Like the sky was orange, everything was orange, we couldn't see. And I'm like, man, it's like the fucking end of days over here.
Yeah.
So that's when my coworker was like, yeah, the forest fires in Canada are causing changes in the atmosphere. So I was like, holy cow. So we were rocking N95s for the next day or two, and then today it's just normal, like nothing ever happened.
Gorgeous today.
Yeah. So I don't know. I'm looking at the air quality measurements. It's at like 50. It's fine. It's crazy.
The other day it was like 300 plus 400?
Yeah, in New York
hazardous.
it went up to like 400. But they were also saying, like, even if you wear an N95 mask, the particles are so small that it can get past the mask and you can breathe it in and it can get into your bloodstream. So I'm like, well, gee, that sucks, you know? But
no, it was some crazy. It just felt very eerie.
It did.
It just had a science fiction. Like I was half expecting monsters to just come rolling in with the yellow haze, and I would have been totally like not fine with it, but I would have been totally ready. I'm like, whatever's gonna roll down, I'm going full on Mad Max right now. And that's.
Did you ever see The Mist?
Yes.
With Thomas Jane, it was like that, but orange.
Yes.
It's like there's just a cloud of.
It was but like I think in The Mist it was even more dense than that, where you couldn't even see like 15 feet in front of you.
Yeah.
And but it was really dense. It was really dense.
Not a day. I texted you. I was like, it's not a day to go out for a jog. Or was that somebody else I said that to?
No, you did. And then I was like, no, I didn't go out this morning. I just made that executive decision. It just did not seem that... I mean, I noticed it on Tuesday afternoon. I was outside on my deck, and I was like looking at the sun setting. And it was just weird because I was like, I could actually look at the sun. Like, it usually would hurt your eyes, you know? Like, I was like, I'm looking at it. It's kind of like an orangey pink. And it's not hurting my eyes. It's like, and then I asked my daughter came out. She was like, "No, that's the moon." I'm like, "No, it's the sun. It's blocked out by this really weird looking haze right now that was settling in." And that was on Tuesday, but then it just steadily got worse from there. Whereas like in the morning, it was just it was crazy stuff.
You know, it made me think of like massive cataclysmic events. right? So like, can you imagine? That was just a forest fire, right? I know it was a massive forest fire, and as far as forest fires go and brush fires go, this one was massive. But if like a meteor hit the Earth, like the one that destroyed all the dinosaurs and stuff like that, I was just like, the idea that a brush fire can cause a carpeting atmospheric change as far as it did was eye-opening.
Here's something a little bit more plausible and scarier than a meteor hitting the Earth.
What's that?
Is Yellowstone National Park.
What about Yellowstone National Park?
It sits on top a massive supervolcano that hasn't blown in about as long as scientists say, hey, it's time for it to go again. And that thing pops off, you're talking way, way worse than, some smoke blowing our way. So
wow.
You're talking like ash and just the whole entire planet getting covered with smoke and just yeah, it would be crazy. Mass extinction event.
Yeah. It would be considered a mass extinction event, you think?
Yeah. Well, I mean, like,
wow.
Pretty much not all living life, but it would be a significant portion would end up. Because, I mean, that's just the thing, is that you think that everything would end with the apocalypse. But the thing is that life is very persistent, and we've lived with, like, life on Earth, not saying humans, but life on Earth has lived through these cataclysmic events, ice ages, meteors hitting, things like that, and then has developed into something different over the course of millions and millions of years. So
yeah,
it may be the end of one type of organism, let's say maybe perhaps us or whatever, but then it may end up being the precursor to something else coming along the line, because life is very... It was in Jurassic Park. Was it the line that life finds a way?
Yeah, I think that was Ian Malcolm's the character Ian Malcolm. So life finds a way. I always find
life finds a way.
And he does the hand thing because that's a Jeff Goldblum signature.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I want to talk about the pen of the week, and Tom and I discussed it. So I got this beautiful package in the mail, and in the package came this pen here for everybody watching, and if you're not watching, this is the Bennu Euphoria. What's the model name called? The Goldfish edition?
This is called the Forest Pond.
Forest Pond.
Yes.
Okay.
It is a Bennu store exclusive that is hand-painted.
You can only get it at the Bennu store. It's hand-painted, which kind of boggles my mind. It looks as though that there's a layer of lacquer over the painting, so you can't actually feel the painting. So I'm thinking that it's wrapped in something to protect it. But the reason it boggles my mind is, if you're telling me it's hand painted, does that mean every pen is painted by hand, or they paint it on something else and then they silk screen it onto the pen? Do you know which one it is?
So I'm reading the description on Bennu's website to get a little bit more background.
Share it with everybody watching.
I could share. Let me share it. So I'm just going to share that screen so you can take a look. And so it says, the Forest Pond fountain pen features hand-painted goldfish and white water lilies set to a pearly aqua blue background. Blue and green glitter foil added to the pen's material creates an illusion of the play of light in the depths of a forest pond, adding vibrancy and vividness. True piece of art, this unique pen is available exclusively on the online store, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so lovingly handmade and hand-painted with a series of multicolored layers. Process takes up to 5 days to complete and results in the pen's impressive depth of colors and unique glare. So that, from what they say, it's completely hand-painted, so...
And it takes 5 days.
Yeah, and it says this means each pen slightly differs in artwork and as such is one of a kind.
Wow. So that is interesting. I do think that that's kind of cool. Don't you think the artist is sitting there and he's like, for the love of God, I'm tired of painting these goldfish. So this pen has a MSRP of $280 US. That seems like a lot, but if you consider the fact that, I feel like for a Euphoria that's a lot, but you also
regularly you could find one at full retail of just the normal ones. I think they're like 140 or 150, I want to say.
So they actually tell you how many they have in stock. They have 17 available.
They do?
Which is cool. So you can only buy this at the Bennu website. I think it's cool. I think it's worth it. Considering, listen, you have an artist sitting over it and slaving over it, and that takes time.
Well, for me, it was I saw that pen a while back, and I was like, that's amazing because I love the blue. I usually love blue and gold is one of my favorite color combinations on a pen particularly. And then seeing the fish on there, but I'm not really that much into fish. But then it went out of stock. I think they ran out of them or whatever. So I was like, oh, they must have sold out that edition. But then I was looking back at that page with all, because they've increased their lineup of the hand-painted pens over the last, like, let's say year or so, since they've moved their factory and stuff like that. So they've increased that variety. And I was looking through all the designs on there, and I happened to see, hey, it's available again. And I was like, you know what? I didn't want to wait again and then have it not be available, and then there's like, oh, we're not doing that design anymore, because then I was like, you know who would appreciate the goldfish? Roy would appreciate the goldfish.
I definitely would be. Although I am not equipped to raise goldfish because it's a cold water fish, and I feel like my room always is too warm for goldfish, and I know that goldfish will suffer. So you'd have to like somehow make the water colder. You'd have to like... Yeah, I'd have to keep the room constantly air conditioned because my room temperature in here is above 76 degrees unless I throw the air conditioner on. But if I'm not here, I don't keep the air conditioner on. Yeah, you're going to be spending a lot of money running that electric bill just for a fish. Yeah, but hey, there's no such thing as just a fish. Okay? Just for a fish. Yeah. But... So I do really appreciate this pen. Thank you for Tom for getting it for me, and thank you Goldspot for getting it for me. So this pen is your typical Euphoria. It's got the faceted sides. How many sides is it? It's like, I think it's 10 sides. It's a screw cap. It's 2.5 rotations, which seems like a lot for a twist cap, but nothing's a lot compared to Slickery Done's pen that he sent me. It has a number 6 sized Schmidt nib, which, to my understanding, is currently produced by Yovo. I'm pretty sure, yeah. It's non-branded. It's just the Schmidt nib. I really wish Bennu would invest in actually branding their nibs to complete the whole package. It's a cartridge converter. It has a Schmidt converter. Do you think these are definitely eyedroppable, wouldn't you say? Pretty sure, yes. Yeah. So... like I said, I do believe that the Schmidt nibs are made by Yovo, so the writing experience is similar to that of a Yovo nib. You know, it'd be crazy if they invested, let's say, doing their own nib, and then they did some crazy stuff on the nib. You know, like people have been doing the PVD finishes with the rainbow or like the blue, the red. So what if they did some, crazy masking, and they could do some of the trim could be in red, and they could go whatever the design of the pen is, and then match that. Right. So like something like that, maybe they could go with a blue but with like a gold shoulders, like around the it could be like bicolor, so it could be blue and gold together. I don't know. I'm just imagining even more opulence added to the Bennu brand. I mean, like where else could they add some more crazy glittery colorfulness? Right. I mean, so really quick, I think that it could also make it look a little bit too tacky, don't you think? Like with Bennu, there is no such thing. I think they could just keep going. I think that's what people expect, is that how over the top can they possibly get? True. So I definitely think over the top works for them. But I think there's a limit. That's all I'm saying, I don't... But then again, you never know, because they may go over the top, and then I'll look at it and be like, oh my god, this is so awesome. This is the most amazing thing ever. Right, because I do like an opulent-looking pen, especially when it comes to pens that have a lot of abalone shell. So Monteverde released the Super Mega in all abalone. Love that thing. Love that thing. It just, you can't stuff more opulence into that to the point of making me say, hey, this is just too much. No, you can't do it. I like it. The more it is, the better. But there's also going to be people who will disagree and don't like it. It's taste. It's something for everybody out there now. Yeah. All right, so let's talk about the Platinum Curados and whether or not it can stay inked and usable after 6 months. So I want to talk. I don't want to spoil it for an ink guy, Adam's video, because his video was launched about a day ago. And he did a video experiment. Now, the video experiment is... Let's talk about the background of it. It's not like he got the pen, videotaped himself inking it up, waited 6 months, and then showed the results, correct?
Right. So if you want to back it up to where this had initially began, was that he had an experiment with the 3776 that we were talking about in one of the previous Pentertainment podcast episodes.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the precursor then for the discussion of, well, there's this Curados that then Platinum evidently says, or they claim, that can last 6 months unretracted and still be able to write with it immediately after being in a drawer for 6 months. So then after listening to that, Adam reaches out to me and he says, hey, I'd be willing to buy one and then give it a shot, and then you could write with it, you could write a note with it, and then put it in a box, wait 6 months, send it to me, and then and I was like, I'll do you one better. I'll just send it to you, and we'll just, that way you could review it and do whatever you'd like to it. Thinking that, like, okay, this is an experiment. What if this doesn't go as planned and it doesn't write when he gets it? But I had so much confidence, being that the Platinum 3776 overperformed expectations on his video, that I was like, you know what? I think that the Curados is probably going to hold its weight here. So we ended up doing that back in December. I took a video. It's actually up on one of the Gold Spot Instagram reels way back when. I'll do like another video probably soon, just to kind of put everything together and to show that that was the same pen. So I did a video writing the note that I sent to Adam, and I put that pen with the note away in a desk drawer. 6 months later, I had a reminder, because I'm organized like that, so I had a reminder to contact Adam. And so I contacted him, just check in. Hey, remember that thing we were talking about before? 6 months later, so let's do this. So I sent it to him. He opened up and did his video, and now it's up. The results are up on YouTube, and I didn't want to spoil it because I don't want to steal his thunder.
Right, I don't want to spoil it either, but we will include the link to Adam's video. It's he's an online YouTuber who does videos on fountain pens, and he is named an ink guy on YouTube. We'll include that in the video. Now, I do want to talk about it without giving away spoilers. Do you think that the way you guys did it, by you writing with the pen when you first inked it up, and then storing it for 6 months, and then sending it to him after 6 months, could have added variables that would have changed the results had he gotten the pen right away and waited 6 months with it in his desk, it not being sloshed around and moving? I think that, so what I mean is this. You held onto the pen. It was stagnant for 6 months, and then you shipped it to him after 6 months. And during that shipping process, it's on a plane, it's in a truck bouncing around, it's shaking around. Maybe somehow being on a plane or being in a truck or during the travel and the moving around can cause the pen to write when it normally wouldn't had it been sitting, or to not write when it normally would have if it had not been shaken around. So that's the one variable that I feel like could have been avoided had you shipped it the day you wrote that note. Then it would have been sitting. So I think that whether the results were it did write or it didn't write, I think they were affected by the handling of the pen. You know what I'm saying? Because the experiment needs to be if it's capped. I mean, I guess it's just if it's capped for 6 months. It doesn't say whether it's still and capped for 6 months, right?
Right. And also what is impressive, too, is that despite the fact that it did have ink in it, and I've seen this on the receiving end number of times, where customers will send returned pens fully inked, and seeing what that may happen in transit, that that there could be the potential of ink just getting everywhere because it just gets jostled around too much.
Sure.
So or that the pressure changes in the, let's say, flight, or if it's because it's not going to be in cabin pressured, pressure controlled, or maybe, I don't know, but you don't know what's going to happen from point A to point B,
Sure.
how it's going to be handled. And sometimes you would just open up a package. So I'm saying, like, when the returns department opens up a package and the pen was still inked, it could just be like a giant inky bomb just went off. And that's what I usually say for customers: please just empty the pen out, just flush it out. Even if it has like a little bit of trace ink, it's okay, but not leave it completely inked, and then just up to the gods as whether or not it's going to end up being received without being like completely exploded everywhere.
This is going to be a hard question for you to answer, but I'm going to ask it just because I'm curious. When it comes to receiving pens that are inked, is there typically a greater percentage of a certain brand of pen that is more likely to explode or leak during transit when it's filled versus pens that are not?
Not really, because you don't see that many of them come back like that. Most people are very considerate about it, and it's kind of like the be kind rewind thing. It's like just make sure that it doesn't have a whole mass amount of ink in it. That even if it does have a cartridge, usually with a cartridge you'd be safer, I think, because it's a smaller amount of ink. And it's not, even if the cartridge was empty, it's not going to have a ton of air in it to then mess around with the pressure changes and then spill out all over the place. But if it's, let's say, like a vac fill or an eyedropper, and it just wasn't, the safety valve wasn't engaged, then it's like, well, game's off, man. It's just anything could happen. So
You know how someone could really just fuck around if they wanted to is they could just buy an eyedropper pen, like one of the Opus pens, fill it to the brim with ink, and then you ship it back, and then it's like a inky mess when you get it. But I don't think anybody would do that just for fun.
That would not be fun.
No
fun at all.
It wouldn't. No, but I was actually curious, like, what kind of pens have more of a propensity of leaking in transit.
No, I don't know that per se. I don't think there's any brands or pens that stick out in that regard.
By the way, you know what pen brand does very well after sitting in a desk or not being used for an extended period of time, and then writes right out of the drawer when you take it back out? And I give the brand a lot of flack for being unreasonably expensive, but Montblanc. So after last week, what I did was I put the pen in the pen wallet, and I literally just left it for about a week just to see how the flex nib would write after a week of not being used, literally just being untouched and unmoved. And I pulled it out, and right away it started writing.
Awesome.
As wet as it was on day one when I filled it.
That's awesome.
So, yeah, I'm definitely enjoying the Montblanc Meisterstück calligraphy pen. I just wish that it wasn't so expensive, because it's so expensive. And it's not only is it so expensive, it's just so out of reach for so many people who like flex nib writing. So,
well, that's the problem with flex nib writing, is that so many people ask, what's a great first flex nib, or what could I do to get started with a flex nib? And there's really no good answer for that up until you start spending money for, let's say, a Pilot Falcon. And that's a pretty hefty investment for most people who are looking just to dabble.
right.
So I might even just say, you know what, if you're just interested in maybe just trying out the Spencerian or the calligraphy style of like playing with just a flexible nib, but just kind of throwing out the fact that it has to be a fountain pen, is just do a Browse blue pumpkin nib in a dip nib holder. And you just basically have to just say, you know what, I can't, it's like, I'm not going to be getting a good experience with an actual feeding fountain pen that carries its own ink. I'm just going to use a dip nib just to play around with the whole concept of flex and the whole practice of using a flex nib, because it operates the same way. It's just that you just have to keep dipping it in order to feed yourself with the ink that's required to do the flexing. So, that's real. I kind of feel that would be the best way and the cheapest way to really get started, because I think with a wooden nib holder and one of those dip nibs, you're in it under like $10. And I think you're going to get much more satisfying, more true to form flex experience than, let's say, buying a Noodler's Creeper pen, which could end up making you curse all of the pen gods for giving you this pen, because because if it's made with the vegetal resin, it'll smell awful and it just won't flex well, and then you have to tinker around with it to get the flow right. It's just like, just dip the browse nib, play around with that, see if you like the whole aspect of slowing down and writing with that calligraphic flair. And then when you kind of get a good feel for it, then you could say, oh, you know what, I'm going to try Pilot Falcon, Custom 912, something like a Scribo if you really want to go hitting for the fences there, or the Mont Blanc when it becomes available, that Mont Blanc calligraphy nib.
You said something earlier that I wanted clarification on, because some people might not know what you're talking about, and I didn't. What do you mean blue pumpkin? You said blue pumpkin.
There's a particular nib. It's called the Steno nib. I think it's like the 66 Steno nib. It's nicknamed the Blue Pumpkin because it is blue, and I don't know, I guess it kind of has a pumpkin-ish shape. It kind of looks round, but it's got these interesting cutouts that are on the side, and that's what makes it flexy. I can try to show it for the camera, but yeah, this is one that I use, and you have to know like a little bit of what you're doing with this, because you have to set it up with just putting it under some flame. You have to just kind of use like a little lighter and burn off the excess machining oils that are made for this pen. But then I've been using this for years in this dip nib. I've used it for a lot of the swatch cards that I have, the coloring cards. So, and it still is kicking now. I've not had to replace it, so.
Oh, wow. So you've been using that same nib for years.
Yeah, but I don't use it all the time. I just use it for basically when I'm just sampling inks and writing down the dip testing inks and stuff like that. So it's not like it's a daily use item. So
right. So first thing, I've seen a pumpkin and I've seen that nib, and I never thought that they look like each other.
No.
But whatever.
But that's what it's
anyway,
called.
I would like to share. Hold on a second.
Share. Oh, you're sharing your screen.
No. I'm just sharing. No. I want to share my experience.
Oh.
Yeah. So I remember my experience with flex nib writing started because my buddy Marcos had given me a TWSBI 580 mini, the mini 580, and it had a 1.1 stub, I think it was.
Okay.
And I loved the calligraphic flair that it had on the downstroke and everything like that, and I thought it was really cool. I started looking into different types of cursive, and then he started talking to me about like flex nibs and stuff like that. And the idea of a flex nib just felt very treacherous, because he explained to me that, oh, if you have a flex nib, you spread the tines and you use pressure, yada, 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 and it could cause the tines to splay. And that's why you can't use too much. Then we started talking about it, and the first thing I tried was a Noodler's pen. And I feel like my experience with the Noodler's pen wasn't positive, and I feel like a lot of people will share that same experience, because if you're looking to dabble, you're probably at the point where you're not the best at tuning or adjusting your own nibs.
Right.
So I do like Noodler's pens because it's the cheapest access to flex nib, but I don't like Noodler's pens because it could be a huge turnoff. And I remember thinking to myself, well, I guess now, because the Noodler's isn't all that great, I need to find something that would perform better. So what was the next step? The next step was literally the Pilot Falcon. And the Pilot Falcon obviously was a way better pen, but it does railroad, it does starve, and you don't get a consistent ink line. Then after that, I remember I was just on this fix to find a good flex nib. The next one that I found, I actually bought from Goldspot. I spoke to you about it.
That was a while ago.
Yeah, this was before we started working together. This is just I actually called Goldspot thinking I was going to get Dawn, but then you answered, and I remember asking about the Platinum 3776, the celluloid, and then also the Conklin Sterling Anniversary Flex Pen. Do you remember that? It was a crescent filler.
Right. Was it?
Yeah.
It was like orange, was it?
It was
it
red.
orange or- it was
It
red.
was a red one.
Okay.
And I remember you didn't have them in stock, but you said you can get them, both of them. So I purchased them, and you had asked me, hey, do you mind if I write with it? So I was like, yeah, sure, go ahead. Go for it. Write with it. So when you got it in stock before you sent it to me, you wrote with it on a piece of paper, an A5 size paper, a note saying, hey, thank you for letting me try the pen. I hope you really enjoy it, and blah, blah, blah. And then I got it and I inked it up, and I'm looking at this letter that you wrote, and I'm thinking, what, this pen, this is the ability of this pen. This is fucking amazing. Mm-hmm. So I went and wrote with it, and I couldn't get the same results.
I remember you're like, no, it's not working for me.
Yeah, it certainly wasn't. And I think this was partly my user error and partly the pen not, I guess, keeping up as well. Mm-hmm. Because what I found was the line started off pretty broad and then stretches out, opens up even wider, but the feed couldn't keep up. I don't think the feed it was a cheapy plastic feed.
Yeah.
Then on top of that, it was a 14 karat gold nib, but it didn't have any snapback, if you remember. Do you remember?
Vaguely, yeah.
Yeah.
It was. I
So-
remember you ended up returning it. I remember
Yes.
that. Yes.
I remember thinking, this thing sucks. I hate it. Because I would flex it, and then the tines would stay open. I'm like, what the fuck? But again, that might be because it might have been user error. I might have been putting too much pressure on, maybe. I don't know.
I don't
But
remember.
I do.
It's tough because that's one of the issues I think with flex nibs and with making a great flex nib is that you can't control the user using the pen. So it's
Right.
like, it's,
There's too
it's a
many
very-
differences.
Yeah, it's a very delicate. Just like it's. I mean, like the nib itself is so very delicate, and you put too much pressure on it one certain way, and then it all gets screwed up. And I'm not saying that all of a sudden like somebody just grabs a pen, just smashes on it, but like it's just that it varies so much, and you can't really sit there and just tell somebody, oh no, you're supposed to do it this way. It's like, well, I don't write this way. Yeah, it's
Right.
like that's not my style. So like,
Right.
I'm gonna end up screwing this pen up. But it's so delicate that like that's just what happens. Is that you have to like almost, if you write a certain way, you have to like change the way that you approach it in order to be able to work with it. So that it doesn't screw up the pen. But the moment that you do go over that line, there is no point of return. It's like that's
Yeah.
it. The nib's screwed. So
I think Linda Kennedy from Independence, she's a great nib tuner. She studied under Richard Binder. She calls it demon flexing. But
demon flexing.
in retrospect, what I learned from that whole thing was what works for you didn't work for me. Mm-hmm. So, and that's just 2 people out of 7 billion, right?
Yes.
There are so many variables when it comes to using flex nib writings. You're right. There is no standard way of gauging how someone would write. Now, in the whole scope of fountain pens, not that there's faults. I think fault's the wrong word. Fault is coming to mind. But whose responsibility do you think it is when it comes to flex nibs? A company makes a flex nib, sells it, a person gets it. Is it the person's responsibility to write the way the company intended the nib to be written with, or should the company be responsible for making a nib that can be universally used by everybody?
I think that's a question that's very it's very difficult to answer because I think it exists in almost everything. And some companies take different approaches to that issue, and I know Pelican, one of them, they actually have I think every quarter they produce a set of, like, they get random sets of pens out. So like, let's say they'll maybe get like a M1000, M800, and they'll bring in a group of, let's say, about 20 people, various different backgrounds, familiarity levels with fountain pens and things like that, and they have them test them at their facilities so that they could get some honest feedback, pun intended, about about their nibs. So right. You know, like, they have to, like, the companies do have a responsibility to understand where the market is and how people are using their product, and to best then adjust their approach to making it a better fit for the public. You know, so but like, for something that's specialty like a flex nib, I think it's even harder to do that, because you have to also gauge not only how the person writes with a pen, but then how are they going to write with a pen that also can flex, and are you know, like, how much knowledge do they have to be able to use it properly. I think also the same thing applies with stub nibs too, because especially the broader stub nibs, like 1.5 and above, you have to kind of know that you're keeping both sides of the tines down on the page and not rolling your hand, because sometimes people have a tendency to roll their hand and write with the pen at an angle that it just is not capable. I got a fly going in front of me here. Is not capable of being able to lay down ink, because it needs both sides of the tines to be down at the same time to get that full contact and draw the ink from the nib to the paper.
Yeah. So it's a hard question to answer, right? Like, who is, I'm going to use a harsh word here, who is to blame for the pen not working? Is it the manufacturer for...
Who is culpable?
Is it the manufacturer, or is it the end user for not having the standard that the manufacturer kind of envisioned for when it comes to writing with it, right? It's a tough question to answer. I don't think that there is an answer, but that is a question I do pose to our listeners and viewers. What do you think when you buy a flex nib fountain pen? Are you taking into consideration how you write, or do you expect it to write and flex regardless of how it is that you write and how different you may be from everybody else? If it doesn't work for you but it works for somebody else, do you blame the manufacturer, or do you blame yourself, or is it a combination? Write in pentertainmentpodcast@gmail.com. I'm curious to hear your answers.
I'm sorry. One of the things that I think about is the comparison, or the analogy that the late Susan Worth had said about flex nibs being like manual transmission cars, and kind of taking that analogy into this context. You have to know how to use a manual transmission car. If you're buying a car and the dealership says, all I got is in manual, you drive manual, right? Yeah, I could figure it out. And then you screw up the clutch on like the second day, I think that's on you, right? Because you have to kind of know how to use it, and there is some learning curve involved in it. But meanwhile, an automatic, which is basically any other round type of fountain pen nib, monoline type of nib, you just hit the gas pedal and it goes. You don't have to worry about what gears that you're in, or when you're shifting through the clutch point and everything like that. You have to, it's a different beast. So
I think that's an excellent analogy. I think that's an excellent analogy when it comes to flex nib writing. Yeah, I mean, but the thing is, though, when it comes to differences in terms of users, and some people have different results, like I suck at using a flex nib, whereas you're excellent at it. These differences didn't really exist, I'm assuming, as much in 1910. Everybody knew how to use a flex nib. So I think there's a huge element that's missing today, and that's just the art of calligraphic writing.
Yeah, people
doesn't
were
exist
taught
anymore.
Spencerian or Palmer script, and it was a different, style of writing. Whereas, people are just learning how to print, and the cursive is not being taught as frequently as it used to. And if it is, it's not the Palmer method, or it's not, or maybe the Palmer method actually. But it's not going to be Spencerian or copperplate, the types that you would normally see with some embellishments. like you would use with a flex nib. So, but I think there's enough resources out there, and it's not as complicated as I think we might be making it to seem. That I think you could just spend some time and figure it out. But like I said, I think you could just get the same experience in learning how to use it, and then be able to upgrade to those higher end pens without feeling like you're going to end up ruining the nib. Just using that browse nib, use a dip nib that can flex, and get a good feel for how that performs. But then when you're going to the fountain pen version of it, probably just go a lot more gentle and just kind of just see where that sweet spot is in terms of how much ink is flowing and how much flex you're able to do. And then realize that when you start to see starvation, either the feed is having trouble keeping up, or you're pressing too hard. It's usually kind of like a combination of both.
I have a question for you. In your experience, do you feel that because I think that starting with the dip nib is definitely the cheapest, safest option. So from there, should someone move on to a a steel flex nib, or should they move on to a gold flex nib? And the reason why I'm asking is this: the dip nibs, they're very flexible. Steel nibs are not. And what I found was going from a steel nib to a gold nib, you have to understand that gold is way softer.
Yes.
And you can
takes
genuinely...
way less pressure.
Yes. So being that gold is very soft and way easier to flex than steel, and if you start with a flexible dip pen, don't you think it would be a better idea to go from the dip pen to the gold?
I think that if your budget allows, that would be great, because that would be more of a similar experience where you're putting less pressure on it, because you would have to put more pressure on a steel nib. Since we had talked initially and you had been venturing into steel nibs way back when, a couple of new options had arrived, one of which I think is totally viable if you were, let's say going from that very early starting point of a dip nib, and if you wanted to just get a steel flex nib on a pretty decent pen like a Leonardo or an Edison, or is those Jowo elastic nibs. They're pretty decent. And I mean, while they're not going to give you a crazy amount of flex, nor will they snap back to a very fine point, but I think that they do a good job at just providing that line variation, more so than I feel the OmniFlex do. I think that if you're going to look for a steel nib that flexes in that 100 to 150, 200 range, I would look at the Jowo stainless steel elastic nibs.
But the OmniFlex is a Jowo nib.
But the thing is, they put that whereas you get the Jowo feed on the Jowo one, they put that cheapy plastic feed, that other one.
Oh, yeah.
And that's not really built for. I feel like it's not good for that.
So your issue isn't with the nib, your issue is with the feed.
More
and you're
so with
saying,
the feed, yeah.
Right, so you're saying go with the Edison or the Franklin Christoph.
Yeah, there's a lot of options that they use that steel.
As opposed to the OmniFlex, because the OmniFlex doesn't utilize that feed that the Jowo nib units utilize. And I do like those feeds because they're very springy, and they're so slinky that if the nib is curved more than it should be, the feed just kind of bends to the shape. So there's never any need for heat setting, and I think that's a big reason why the Jowo nib units are
consistent.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I know that Linda Kennedy used to do she probably still does modifications to the feed to make it more wet, which makes the flexing way more consistent. I don't know what she does. It's kind of like a secret,
Or also getting, let's say, those feeds from Flexible Nib Factory, which I've mentioned before, is that they make Jowo ebonite feeds, or they make feeds for the 912, 823, popular pens that sometimes will have those flex nibs on them, and they make the ebonite feeds, which either could have 2 or 3 channels, so you could get really wet and wild, get a 3-channel ebonite feed for your 912, and it will keep up.
Fuck it, let's get 20 channels on that thing. Well, if you look at a vintage Conklin crescent filler, the feed channel is almost like a scoop out. So the ink fills this little reservoir, and it's almost like a little oval shaped I don't know what to call it, just a scoop out. So it's like it's super wet, and that's how you get the wet noodle stuff. But it still to this day boggles my mind and just fascinates me how a guy in a workshop manually making everything was able to make a flex nib that works 100 times better than everything that we have today, despite all the technology we have. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. It is a mystery, but I think we're working to try to figure it out, because I think that's kind of one of the holy grails of fountain pen manufacturing is, can we make a modern flex nib that can write like a wet noodle vintage pen?
No, we can't. I don't think we've seen it.
That's like the moonshot for the fountain pen world. It's like, let's do it. Let's figure out how we could do it. So,
what would you, if you had
it's
to
beyond
pick,
my thing though. I don't know.
If you had to pick one pen to be the reigning flexing champion pen with all the brands and everything that you've experienced, what pen would that be?
With the vintage ones?
No. The ones that exist today.
Oh, like modern ones.
Yeah, so you can pick one modern pen to be your primary flex pen, the champion of all flex pens that you own. Mm-hmm. You can't modify it. You can't get a new feed for it. You just have to buy it out of the box. And that is the champion flex pen. What would that be?
That would be a Scribo. I would get a Scribo Field of Flex. That's what I would do.
That was a very quick response.
It was easy. It was an easy question.
Doesn't Omas still exist, and wouldn't it be the same?
No. So basically, so Scribo had come out of the former employees of Omas, and one of the things that they wanted to do to build their brand was to take the heart of the Omas pen that had gone defunct in 2016 or whatever, and put it into this new brand, Scribo. So they bought all the original tooling, the machinery, the all of the stuff that they used to make the original Omas nibs to make the new Scribo nibs. The new Omas company that has been introduced, that is not as a separate entity entirely. So that's not affiliated with Scribo, nor is it like the original Omas. It's a completely different thing. So
all the machining and tooling is all different and all new?
It's not. Yeah, nothing was taken from the original Omas brand, except
so they just bought the name and that is it.
Yeah. So like some of the models they've been making were with some old, what they call, I think, what they call them, historical stock of rods of celluloid and things like that. So there are some parts and pieces that we're able to, but like everything else is new.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
So okay. So
but like they don't even
Scribo,
have the newer Omas pens, they have the 18K nib, so there's not even like a 14 karat flex nib available for that at this time. So like there could be some in the future, but right now it's just the 18K fountain pen nibs that they have.
How is Scribo doing now, business wise? Are they doing well?
It's pretty good. I mean, it's like they've really started, and because the company had previously gone bankrupt and everything, a lot of the employees who were laid off saw what excess and what dabbling in too many things can result in. So they just stuck it really, they have made a very, very basic promise to their employees and to their customers, is that we're going to make some premium Italian fountain pens that are focused on a writing experience, that are piston fill for the most part. The Pumas are cartridge converter, and that we're just going to focus on that writing experience, just making very limited batches of everything. So everything that they make pretty much is limited. They don't keep around styles for years and years and years. Everything is like limited 219 pieces worldwide, every single material that they do, and then they just cycle in new stuff as they go along.
So like brands like Delta that went under and then got kind of resurfaced, and the makers of or owners of Delta, like Salvatore was a conspirator of Delta. He is now the owner of Leonardo. Omas learned from the mistakes, created Scribo, and they're doing well now.
Yeah, I think that also I'm hoping that the new Delta also learns from the issues of so I think they just all got involved way too much in very, very high-end limited editions, and everything was like a limited edition to them. And then the brand, I think, was sold to Richemont Group for a while, or Louis Vuitton like had owned Omas, I think, for a spell, and I think that it just got away from them being Italian owned, like family owned brands. And I think that's why Aurora has stuck around for as long as it did, is that it's been family owned for such a long time. Even Monte Grappa, I think, was the one that was owned by the Richemont Group for a while, but then they had sold back to Giuseppe Aquila, and it's a very different world when you have a passionate team of people who understand and love fountain pens behind the helm, rather than it being owned by a super conglomerate luxury brand or another, another conglomerate brand that just basically sees you as part of their portfolio of assets. So I've see it both ways, that there's brands that do that, brands that don't, but I've seen the most success with brands that are truly invested in the writing instrument. They really love fountain pens and they have a passion for it, and that they actually care about the people that write with their stuff.
So what was the downfall of Omas?
I just think it was too much. I do believe that they were owned by some outside interests that were not like part of the folks that ran the company, and it just was not. It just didn't seem to me that they had a coherent plan about, like, okay, this is what we're going to do to really become a longer player in the market. That they were just like, well, here's this really other expensive limited edition. And then they did some great things with, let's say, the Ogiva cocktails, because people loved those things and they were at a great price point at the time. But then at the same time, they were also selling limited editions for like $2,000, $5,000, $10,000, and that's what, they were hoping that people would get that. But now I see that there's a lot less of that. So you even look at Leonardo too. Leonardo doesn't carry a lot of pens that are in that really, really high end range. It's mostly in that, we're talking like $150 to $300 to $500 range. Even like Brooks Material pens, they're like $600 around there. They're manageable. They're not these limited editions with the sterling silver vermeil overlays and all the crazy stuff that you still see with Monte Grappa. They're very, very like attuned to the fact that not everybody's rolling that deep these days. So.
Right, nobody can just drop $2,000 on a pen, and so other brands, like for example, Visconti, is that also owned by a private equity firm?
I want to say that it's I don't know exactly, because I know that they had bumped Dante out, Dante Del Vecchio, one of the founders of Visconti. So there has to be some other players involved on the board there that just ended up being able to oust him at some point or another. So I don't know exactly what the structure of that is.
I'm just wondering if in the future we're going to see other brands go the way of Omas because private equity firms have a hand in the business. Because it seems, based on everything we're talking about, when a private equity firm is involved, they lose touch with the community, and that loss of touch seems to ultimately be the cause of the demise.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
not necessarily... Yeah, not necessarily private equity firms, but too many owners, too many cooks in the kitchen, I think, can cause that, right?
Well, especially when they have different ideas of how the company should be run, or how much profit, or what the idea of this whole business structure is supposed to be like. So you had a big changeover a couple years ago with Retro 51, with the original owner George Kartsatis retiring. And then the three guys, Adam, Jeff, and I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the third fella that owns Retro 51 now, but they all went in on it. And, so you have a completely different change in ownership. But I think that they wanted to continue. They were all on the same page as far as like, we want to continue the brand. We think that the brand is successful doing what it's doing. We're not going to be making big changes, but we're going to try to, because they had to, buy out the company and buy out George so that he would sell to them and not shutter the company completely. They have a financial commitment to have Retro 51 make money. So, you can't just say it's like, okay, well, I'm just going to build a brand and then from scratch and then like do whatever I want with it. It's like, well, we have to continue making this, making pens that will actually make money for us. So it's a tough, the business side of it is a tough thing because especially you have so many unknowns out there and it's very fickle in terms of the styles and what the market wants. And you want to make hits, but at the same time, you also want to make pens that will resonate with people and that people will enjoy. And it's fraught with a lot of very important decisions to make that could ultimately then cost people their jobs or it's crazy. So
I feel like the transition for Retro 51 was a smooth one though. I feel like once the new owners came in, there might have been a lull or a slowdown in terms of production, but I think that very quickly they got the ball rolling afterwards, and the character and the essence of Retro 51 to me remains unchanged.
And it was a tough I think it was a little bit tougher though in terms of how people perceived Retro 51 because all of a sudden it went from 2020 was like, oh my gosh, the whole brand is they're gonna go away and like I need to buy every limited edition that they come out with and this is gonna be like the last hurrah. And then when it was like, oh, they're saved, they're going to be continuing producing pens, and then the kind of I think the focus changed a little bit more because it was like a lot of people got fatigued, and so especially since it was so hot, so you have so many retailers and so many exclusives, and it was just almost seemed like every week somebody was dropping a new Retro 51, and I think it just tired a lot of people out who were just getting to a fever pitch at that moment in 2020, especially with like that particular moment in time was also an anomaly with people not being able to spend money on vacations and then staying at home. So they were like, naturally it was like, oh, I could buy this and this will make me happy. So they'll buy, collectible Retro 51s and they'll be able to sit home and be able to write and journal and stuff. So it was a lot different time. So then I really think that George could not have gotten out of that company at a much higher point. He like when they say buy low, sell high, I think he sold it the highest he possibly could. He did a great job with that. And then from there, I think it's just been trying to get a good foothold on like, well, what kind of like hopefully not oversaturating the market with so many different styles, and how can we make this good so that all of the retailers can participate and make interesting designs and really add to the brand, and make it much more popular than it already is. But it already is super, super popular. So
right. I think it's great. Well, I think it's about that time we have to call it quit. Thanks for the insight on a lot of the stuff that most people won't have because they're not, in the industry the way you are.
I'm sorry if I like blabbered on a little too much.
No, it's really interesting, especially even for me who, I have more insight than the average end user. But in spite of that, there's still a lot of stuff that you're telling me that like I'm like, oh wow, I didn't know that. So it's good for people to hear this because a lot of times people will just see a pen and say, oh, this is a pen. Why is it $155, not $149? And they get bent out of shape. A lot of stuff goes on. Not that they need to know that or they have to know that, but it gives them a greater understanding, maybe possibly in the best case scenario, a greater appreciation of what's happening. And I think that it's all that's valuable, and I'm glad that we can talk about it. But anyway, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I agree with you, and I think this is something that to think about with everything, is that we sometimes take for granted all of the little things that are around, like material things that we have, but know that they come from somewhere, and that there's usually multiple hands involved with it, and it is truly, I feel like, a miracle that when you order something, you could place an order for something and it's there in a matter of a few days. It's like one of those modern miracles that I think now we take for granted, but that so many hands and so many minds are involved in every step of the process. And it's just, and when you do have to spend a little bit more to get something that you truly enjoy and appreciate, that it's worth it, because there's going to be so many people that are then affected or involved along the way. that you wouldn't realize unless you pull back the hood a little bit and you're pulling back the curtain. You're seeing the behind the scenes of everything that's involved, and that's what sometimes we need to do a better job of, especially like the manufacturers too have to do a little bit more in terms of like showing people. It's like, hey, these just don't appear out of thin air, or they're not just churned out of a machine, like punched like through a machine every 5 seconds. Like most of these pens, they are, they're hand held, they're polished, they're assembled. Like there's a team of people behind every little aspect of that pen, and that's one of the reasons why I fell in love with that Lamy 2000 the way that I did, that Bauhaus blue, and spent ridiculous sums of money, because I actually saw it in the factory. I happened to see out of the corner of my eye people working on it and polishing and sanding the barrels and stuff, and I'm like, oh, just that connection of just seeing that people were hand holding and making these things right in front of me, and it just that was it for me. And that's the kind of experience I would hope that a lot of people get when they handle a pen and they fall in love with it. Is that I was like, wow, somebody really took the time in producing this thing and making it for me.
I agree. I really wish there were more the making of videos, because one of the videos that had such an impact on me, and this you talking just made me remember this, was the making of the Visconti Divina. Do you remember? Did you ever see that video?
No, I haven't seen it.
Oh, there's a YouTube video. It's old, but they go through the making of a Visconti Divina, and I remember just the whole process. Now the video is only like 5-10 minutes long, but based on what I was saying, clearly it doesn't take 5-10 minutes to make the pen. But there's such a long process, so much like work that goes into it, that it made me appreciate the pen, and it also made me think, wow, maybe the amount of money they're charging for it is for a reason. You know what I mean?
And you would love to see that with your fish pen too, just seeing it, somebody just taking a very, very fine brush and putting those additional color embellishments and layering it on there.
Sure.
Just being able to see that would be like, yeah, that's mine. That's awesome.
Yeah, and that's why it's $280. You know what I mean? So I think if there were more manufacturers, I wish they did spend more time to make those videos. You know what the thing is though? It's so easy to just shoot the footage of people making it. Just shoot an hour's worth of B-roll. Fucking send it to me and I'll make the video. You know what I mean? Like, shit. That would be great. Like the making of whatever pen. I would love that. I would absolutely love that. And I think that people would love it too.
What I think may be a difficult thing though is that some of these, let's say, manufacturing techniques might be like somewhat trade secrets, or something that you would have to protect with a non-disclosure agreement or something like that. So,
yeah, that's right.
But like you could show the basic stuff. Just as long as you show that people actually physically made the pen and that they were
So and I can understand why a company like Montblanc wouldn't want to do it, because really, and I don't know this is a fact, but it might take them like 10 minutes to make a single pen. It might just be a machine that just pumps beads of plastic into a fucking, the injection molding machine. And then all they have to do is now put the nib together and stuff. I don't know. I'm not depreciating Montblanc. I love my Montblanc pens. I'm just saying maybe some brands, it would behoove them not to let you know how easy it is. Right? And then some brands, maybe it behooves them not to let you know how intricate a process it is, because then their competitors could be like, oh, let's copy that.
Yes, or I know how to do that more efficiently. I could just do this, that, and the other thing, and boom, I can do the same thing.
Yeah, but I mean, interesting conversation. I thank you for it, and I thank everybody for listening. This was episode number 166 of the PenBoyRoy Pentertainment Podcast. More reviews to come. We're going to leave the YouTube video of an ink guy, our good friend Adam, in the link below. And thanks again for listening. Love you guys. Be well. Be safe.
Stay inky.